I'm always like, what negative feedback did you get? It's like, well, I had a fan email me back and say that like they didn't like that I sent, a second sales email. It's like, okay, like who else? And it's like, well, that was it. Like one person. And I was like, okay, so one person out of 3,000. You know what I mean? It's like that kind of perspective when you think about it. It's like kind of comical to just knee jerk react and overcorrect to like one or two people's reactions to you sending a sales email.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast brought to you by IndiePRO.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy. This is episode 243, and we're going to be talking today about misconceptions and obstacles regarding selling in this two-part kind of series on selling. With me, as always, is your co-host, Ed Isola. Ed, what's going on, dude? I'm really excited to share some stories in this episode.
Yeah, me too. And I feel like this is going to be a cool episode to like just be like, here's an example of when people didn't want to sell things. And then they did. And guess what? They made tons of money. And what's cool about this is that these are stories that kind of span the spectrum of all different sizes of artists. So yeah, I'm excited to dive into it. I think it'll be really insightful for people to kind of get a different perspective of the importance of making offers to fans.
Yeah, for sure. I'm really excited about this. And I guess you said it well in saying that this spans a spectrum of artists that are building up a fan base for the very first time to artists that have a lot of fans. But I think there's a common thread here that we're going to talk about today, which is a bit of a fear of selling and a fear of overexposing fans or saturating your fan base or creating fatigue on social media. And I think the myth that we're trying to bust today is about frequency and about using different channels and about being afraid to sell, because I think it's a fear that a lot of artists have, even if they don't want to admit it, and then their teams are kind of forced to reckon with that. So if we can break some of the misconceptions and obstacles and fears around selling today, that would be a win in my book. And if you guys dig the stuff that we talk about on the show, leave us a review and let us know that you dig it. It really helps us get out there to more artists and more bands and more musicians and help create more successful music businesses and music success stories in the indie community. So if you like what we're doing, we'd really appreciate if you let us know. That would be amazing. But let's dive into this. I want to start with a story from IndieX. And I think this could be applied pretty broadly to a lot of clients that we work with, who, especially ones that are getting into selling online to their fans for the very first time through their online stores. But it's about the fear of oversaturating your fan base. And Ed, I know you can share a little bit about this particular case that I have in my mind to kick us off.
Yeah, so to kind of kick things off, I think we're going to start at the biggest level of the spectrum, which is like a large artist that we work with at IndieX who came on, I guess, over 2 years ago now. And when he first came on, it was very much operating from this place of, I want to sell, I want to increase my store revenue, but I only want to do that by posting like maybe a couple extra social media posts. It was very much kind of reserved, and it was like, I want this end goal, but I don't want to do the things that have to get there. And to his credit, the first month or two, it was kind of like a process of trial and error, but it was like, okay, hey, let's try this. Like, what if we get an email list and then let's see how it goes? And what if we try ads? And so it was very incremental to get to the point now where we're making pretty consistent sales promos and there's not really much oversight. It's just like, hey, here's our merch, go sell it, which is great. But I think that one thing that's interesting to touch on there is the transition from like, I don't want to come off as cringy, I only want to post my sales on social media, to, if you fast forward to today, it's the opposite problem, which is, hey, I'm really comfortable doing ads and emails. I don't really want to post on socials, which isn't that great of a mindset either. But it's like, it was a 180. And I think that at the core of it, Jack kind of touched on this, there always exists in artists this internal fear, which I kind of respectfully think is made up. I mean, like if an artist was doing like infomercials and selling that much, that's probably too much. But sending somebody an email once a month or twice a month or once every couple months, it's like, hey, I have new merch, I have new CDs, I have that kind of stuff. It's like, you should be doing that, and you should have it in your footers. But like, to kind of kick things off on that front, that was an instance where this artist didn't post on the most recent promo. And like I said, he transitioned from wanting to kind of only post about it, and fast forward 2 years now, he doesn't want to post at all. And the promo went great, but it probably still cost him, for this artist, $5,000 to $10,000 from not posting on it, which was something he was comfortable not getting. But like, if you're talking about revenue generation, I view text, emails, and socials like pretty equivalently, maybe a little heavier on emails, but like they all drive different forms of revenues for sales promos.
That's an interesting way I didn't even think about the 180 nature of the mindset of that particular artist, where they went from, being shy about email marketing and shy about advertising and really had only sold with social, to now not wanting to take a multi-tiered approach, which is really, not totally neglecting a multi-tiered approach, but I think the takeaway here is like, we've seen the biggest wins with most of our clients when they utilize all the channels that they have at their disposal for selling, for e-commerce. That's social, that's email marketing, that's text marketing, that's paid traffic. When you use all four of those, you can pull out the most wins. And we saw that with him really, really early on, to the tune of like hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is great. That's amazing. But you said it well, Ed, in saying when you omit one channel from that process, it can cost you tens of thousands of dollars. And we've seen that happen. And I think that when it comes to having reservations about selling, the important takeaway to have here is not to omit selling from a particular channel like social media or email marketing or text marketing, but rather to hone in on what the messaging on that particular channel should be, and what the creative should look like, and what the copy should look like, and how hard or soft the calls to action should be, so that you can alleviate those fears in a strategic way, rather than, just saying like, well, I'm just not going to do that because I don't want to, because I don't want to be cringy. You've said plenty of times on this podcast that like, if you're not selling to your fans, if you're not making offers to your fans that are cool and give them the opportunity to take you up on that, then you're doing a disservice for them. And I think that applies across the board, no matter what the platform or channel we're talking about is. And I agree with you that I think the fear and concern around it is largely made up.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because like as approaching it from the marketing side, right? It's pretty standard practice for like any email list that you're on or anything like that to receive multiple emails about promotions. Like, never once has a promotion been like, hey, here is our, I don't know, who's a company? I get tons of emails from Target, whatever, if they're doing a discount for the week. It's like if Target's running a, hey, 10% off the store, whatever their offer is. Like, you're not just going to get an email on Monday about that and be done. You're probably getting like 5 emails over the week. And I don't think that people have bad sentiment towards whatever brand for sending that many emails. Like, they don't, but I think somewhere along the lines, artists have developed this weird stigma of like, if I'm selling things to people, actually, I don't think it's that they're afraid to sell. I think that sometimes artists, I feel like, are so like, view themselves unintentionally on this pedestal of like, if I send an email, if they want it, they'll buy it then. They don't need to see it again. If they like me and they want to buy it, they will take it on the first time. But
that couldn't be further from the truth.
Right. And it's like pretty standard when you dive into like the marketing side of things. Even if an artist was to Google like, how many emails should I send? You will see that, hey, you could send this first email and people that want it will take it. But there's tons of things that happen in life that pull you away from, oh man, I love this. Sorry, I'm in the grocery store and I opened my phone up, right? Like,
right. I'm walking my dog right now.
Yeah.
I'm picking up my kids. I'm paying my bills. Like, so many things.
Right. And so that's like one example of why people get distracted. Two is like, sales offers cost money, and maybe someone doesn't have the money in their bank account, right? They're like, oh, I get paid Friday. Let me get it on Friday. But they forget. And so like, that's where I view the sales. And I think as an artist, you have to just think about it as like, look, if I'm doing a good job with my segmentation in my email list, you're eliminating that fear, right? The fear is I don't want to send the same person the same email multiple times and just blast them with buy. I think to Jack's point, that's where you can start to tailor your approach. And that's something that helps me personally feel comfortable selling. Is like, I would feel super weird if it was just like the same message sent 50 times over the course of a week over all the platforms. But it's not. It's like socials has their own language and their own pictures and that kind of thing. Texting has its own kind of like informal language with links. And then emails, like we send 3 emails, that's perfectly fine. And with the segmentation that I was talking about, as you get into like, if you have Shopify and Drip, you can split these things out and say, hey, let me send my first email to everybody on my list. Then let me send my second email to everybody on the list who didn't buy something from the first email, and then let me do the third one to the people who didn't buy from there. And so it's not actually like if you're implementing these best practices like we do at IndieX, it's like, it's not actually like you're selling to everybody with every email. You're kind of just like picking them off or taking them off as they buy. And that's a really, I feel like, good approach that kind of helped the artists that we were talking about understand, like, dude, we're not just blasting. We actually have an approach of, let's word the text this way. And the first one says, hey, the merch is live, good through Friday. I'm going to remind you Friday, haha, link. And then Friday it says, here's your reminder. Like that's the kind of thing. We actually just did that exact language for some tickets the 502s put on sales. It's a different type of selling. But that was it. It said today, it was like, hey, there's a pre-sale live. Here's the code. Next opportunity for ticket purchases is Friday. We'll definitely make sure we remind you. And the one on Friday says, it's when Taylor Swift's album's coming out. It says like, taking a 2-minute break from T Swift's album to remind you that tickets are available now for 502's tour. Link, it's very playful.
Yeah, that's so great. Like that's a great example of how you can spin a narrative, both tying back to like the first thing you said, right? And whatever else is going on. And you can also just do light nurturing in between. I mean, like here's a good example. This is something that I almost do with every client that I work with, is when we're doing Black Friday sales or sales around the holidays or any holiday for that matter. There's almost always an email in that automation stack or in the schedule that is specifically just wishing them a happy holiday, happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever it might be. There's almost always just a pure reach out with no hard push on an offer, just a simple PS section reminding them of what you told them about a few days before, and then you can touch base with them again with a stronger call to action a few days later. These are the ways that you can think about how you spin a narrative, and that's just email marketing. I mean, on social media, especially organic, I know that a lot of artists struggle with this, and that's kind of what we're talking about here with this one artist. Was like, he didn't want to post on socials and he lost money because of it. But you can create narratives on social media just the same way. I think you can be even more playful with like the things you can do with video content on social, especially with short form content, how like popular and kind of on that is right now. There's so much you can do. I want to encourage anyone listening to pay attention in the next 2 months of how some of your favorite brands are doing organic social regarding sales, because you will definitely learn something about social selling.
Absolutely. And I kind of think what we're circling around here as we're talking about it more, just kind of having different views on different angles of it. It's like, artists are afraid to sell, but why are artists afraid to sell? Number one is that they think they're being too pushy, which I think we've kind of talked through that narrative. I think to your point right there, Jack, like number two is just the lack of organization of the narratives around the sale. Because again, the artist that we were talking about was like, what eventually became the selling point was when I would come to the phone call and say, hey, look, we want to sell this, and here's the exact narrative top to bottom of how we're approaching it. Like I just said with the text and the emails. But that's something where I think artists and their teams, it feels like a lot of times merch teams operate from the hip, from my experience. They shoot from the hip. And it's kind of like, hey, we got this new merch collection coming out. This was a kind of how this artist stuff was operated. It was like, hey, we have this new merch collection coming out. It's live on it's done Monday. Let's throw it up Tuesday and see how it goes. And I kind of stepped in there and said, hey, it's done Monday. That's cool. Let's launch it the week after, so we actually have time to like make these emails make sense, make this rollout plan make sense. And to me, I think that getting the designs, all that stuff, it has its own challenges, right? But I think that something that helps an artist feel more comfortable is when they understand how that plays into their narrative as an artist. Because if you sit down with your artist, or if you are the artist and you got to put on your manager cap for a second, I always find it best for me personally to feel comfortable and say, hey, we have this EP coming out. We have this offer. Here's how we're going to set it up. And here's the language and everything. Because if you pre-draft your text and you pre-draft your emails and you pre-draft your socials a week before, or even 4 days, like 2 days before, whatever you want to do, it allows you to string those together so the narrative is cohesive. Like that text example is a great way to say, you allude to the fact you're going to remind them. So they're kind of already expecting a reminder, and then that turns them off of being upset. You can do the same thing in email. You can do the same thing on socials. You can say, hey, I can be playful here. But that to me is like, you should start making more sales offers, but you should also be more intentionally organized about it. And I mean, we're kind of outlining right here what it should be. It's like 2 texts, 3 emails, handful of social posts, 7 to 10 days. That's it, and then just sit and make the offer. But it's not some crazy thing, man. Like it's as easy as an artist or the manager sitting with them and saying, hey, we want to do 2 texts, 3 emails, 3 social posts over a week. What would you say to your friend if you were going to sell them this product? Like, how would you introduce this product to them on text? How would you do it on email? And just like talk with the artist, and that will develop the kind of streamline. And I think that removes the angst from people. At least that's what I've seen work best in terms of, quote unquote, convincing that selling makes sense.
Selling.
Yeah, right. I'm selling. But like that kind of has yielded the best results in terms of connecting the fact that, oh, this is why selling is important, because I'm selling this week, but then next week I'm doing a tour announcement. And then the week after that, I'm releasing a single, and then I'm selling something again. But it's not just I'm selling.
This brings me to actually 2 examples from artists at the agency where we've talked a lot about, like, you don't want to exclude certain channels, especially if you've got audience on them, right? We've talked about social, we've talked about email, we've talked about text, we've talked about paid traffic. And you don't want to exclude channels from your sales promotions and your drops or your record releases or whatever whatever selling season you're in. But also, like, frequency is important here too, which is what you started to touch on, like, in building a schedule. And there were 2 artists recently at the agency that both actually didn't want to send last chance emails in their promotions, and they were like, "Hey guys, we don't want to send the last chance email." One was out of fear because he had churned a couple subscribers, and I can't remember what the reasoning behind the other artist was. Maybe you can remember, but I know one was about some unsubscribes, which was not really a massive concern at all. The size of his list compared to the unsubscribes was very, very small. So if I can squash that fear for you right now, people are going to unsubscribe from your email list from time to time. Let them. They will come back later when you have another reason for them to come back on that they want to. I just want to throw that one out there immediately. List hygiene is good. And if people unsubscribe on their own accord, thumbs up. But let's talk about frequency a little bit. Because like you said, Ed, people need to be reminded. And that is what frequency in messaging drives for you. That's why you need more than one post. That's why you need more than one email. That's why you shouldn't turn off the last chance email in your series.
Dude, I mean that is honestly so crazy to me. It's like the last chance thing, I think, is something that people overlook. I would actually understand more if people fought back. Okay, so I guess first, for some context, typically what Jack's saying is like, we'll send emails, right? And the first one is like an announcement and say like, hey, Jack's new sweatshirt is here. Then a few days later, I'll be like, hey, just wanted to make sure that you saw Jack's new sweatshirt is here and stress some cool things about it. Then a few days later, as it's closing down, it's like, hey, today's the last chance to get Jack's new sweatshirt. That's kind of the typical structure. A lot of times it's like artists push back against the third email, which is so strange to me because that's the closeout, like that's the one I feel like that artists should be most on board of, like, hey, it's the last chance to get this. I would get more if they're like, I don't like the second email. Like, let's just do it's here and this is the last chance. I still would think that doesn't make sense, but like, it's so weird to me to just fight back against, hey, I don't want to send a last chance email, because that email, the way we see on the back end sales come in, you get most of your sales on the first email, right? And then the second email will probably bring in like, I don't know, like 20 to 50% of the first email. And then that third email typically I feel like is bringing in like 30 to 60% of the first email. So it's like a slight uptick on that last email when you start throwing in like, hey, last chance, like more people react to it.
Yeah, you're getting urgent here. You're really letting people know like this is it. This is your shot.
Right. And so that's the thing where I think what dissuades people here is that hypersensitive to any kind of, quote unquote negative feedback, even if it's one person. It's like if there's 3,000 people on the list, an artist will come back and say, hey, I don't want to send the last email because I got a ton of negative feedback on it. And my question then is always like, oh, okay, like
how many?
Right. Well, I'm always like, what negative feedback did you get? It's like, well, I had a fan email me back and say that like they didn't like that I sent, a second sales email. It's like, okay, like who else? And it's like, well, that was it. Like one person. And I was like, okay, so one person out of 3,000. You know what I mean? It's like that kind of perspective when you think about it. It's like kind of comical to just knee jerk react and overcorrect to like one or two people's reactions to you sending a sales email versus all the other people that probably bought, where it's like, okay, you send a sales email, you sell 50 things, one person hits you back and says, I didn't like it. It's like, okay, well, that's 50 to 1, that kind of context. And I don't think artists put any value in the people that buy in that. They put value in them, but like they don't put any value in the people that buy as they're debating whether or not they should send another email. They're not looking at it as like, well, I sent this and I sold 50 and one person didn't like it. It's like, I sent this, one person hated it, and I guess I'm done now, versus, oh, maybe I can get another 20 people to buy, which I think is the mindset you should have. Kind of like that like whole like abundance versus like, scarcity or whatever it is. Just the way that artists tend to like put too much value into the fact that one person hits them back with negative reaction and they totally withdraw versus the fact that many people take the offer and they don't consider that that's like actually what's happening versus the one overreaction.
Yeah, I think that perfectly outlines here why it's important to listen to data, not only your own data that you're gathering, but also data that your team has digested and seen across other artists that they work with, for example, or other businesses. Like we see time and time again that when you increase the frequency of your messaging and selling and you amplify across multiple channels, that you will sell more. That is data that is crucial to you as an artist and crucial to the artist that you work with if you're a manager or a label marketer or a marketing team or whatever. That's really, really important to know and to consider in your strategy. So I hope that my whole hope with this episode was like, I don't want artists to miss out on at-bats because of, the small negative signals that they might get when there are overwhelming amounts of positive signals that are coming in the form of website traffic, of sales, of excited fans, of people talking, of sharing, of social engagement, all that stuff that really sometimes just gets boiled down to numbers and overshadowed by maybe the one email that you get or the one text message that you get. And if there's one recommendation that I can make kind of to wrap this episode up is you don't want to be afraid of selling based on misconceptions or myths or ideas that you've made up in your head about it when there's a plethora of data telling you not to be afraid of selling and to not miss out on the opportunity to remind people of what you've got going on and the offer that you're making, because they do forget, because they're real human beings that have needs and things going on in their lives, 7 or 8 steps ahead of whatever it is that you're doing. And there's a lot of different ways that people can be reached. And if you are fortunate enough and you've worked hard enough to build up a following online, audiences that you can retarget, and lists, you want to use those. Otherwise, they're just going to waste. So I hope that is a little bit of tough love to shake people out of, some of the scaries that they have around sales.
To just finalize that thought, it's like if you are adverse to selling, take a second to think about why you're adverse to selling. And then if it's just your internal feelings, take the time to do a little bit of research, even just Google things and kind of get a better understanding. You don't have to take our word for it, but if you go and research, you'll find that what we're saying is like accurate and it makes sense as you dive in, like, oh, I can send this email, I can do that. And you'll come to that realization on your own and you'll feel more comfortable there.
Well said. Well said. Well, to speak to, we've done a lot of hopefully myth busting here today, and a little bit of shaking the fears out of folks. If you're an artist that has a large engaged fan base and you're looking to tap into monetization online, maybe for the first time, or maybe you're just looking to ramp it up more than it's currently been, we'd love to talk to you. We'll include a link to the IndieX application if you want to apply to work with our agency. We'd love to hear from you, and you could work with Ed and myself and the rest of our team on really amplifying your e-commerce sales. So we'd love to hear from you, and we're going to keep this conversation around selling going in next episode. So we'll see you guys next time on Creative Juice as we explore a little bit more about how you never have to find another reason to sell ever again. We'll see you guys next time. Peace.